All right, in this video, I'm going to talk about a vocabulary activity that I basically just call like the continuum activity. And I do that because you see this double-headed arrow. That's a continuum, right? It continues in both directions. And we can think of this side as more of something and this side as less of something. Now those categories might change a little bit depending on your topic, but for example, volume of speaking. So more of the volume of speaking, so louder, and less of would be softer. So I start with, for example, the word said in the middle. Okay. It's very general when we write, when we tell stories, he said, she said, that kind of thing. But you'll notice I have some other words down here. Yelled, shouted, whispered, screamed, muttered. Now we want to put them in order from quietest to loudest, right? So if I think about, well, maybe I want students first to start with which ones are louder than said and which ones are quieter. So yelled, shouted, and screamed go over here, and muttered and whispered. But now I want to put them in order. So this is where conversations happen and nuance of meaning. And students might not always agree, and it might depend on context. So for example, scream seems like the loudest. Because if you scream because you're scared or you're in danger, you're going to scream really loudly. But it tends to be, for a shorter duration, right? It's usually not for very long. Now, people can scream at each other when they're fighting, but oftentimes we call that yelling or shouting. Now, he yelled, he shouted. Which one seems louder, or do they seem really equal? Well, I yelled across the room, I yelled hello, I shouted. Yelled seems slightly less loud than shouted. And you could look for examples in text, but I'm going to put them pretty close together because I think, and they're not too far from screamed. There we go. And then muttered and whispered. I think muttered, the difference to me is muttered, you can't hear what the person is saying. You can hear the volume, but the words are... So it's not necessarily quieter than a whisper. It's just less clear. You can, if you are close enough to someone whispering, you can hear them, what they're saying. Somebody who's muttering, you can't understand the words, even if they're not that quiet. So for me, muttered goes here, and whisper is quieter. Now you could have students add more words like this, more saying verbs, and have them put it on. Now some people might say, no, I think muttered is quieter because people tend to, they kind of do it under their breath. So maybe they have examples that it's quieter. There's sometimes right answers, like yelled is louder than said and muttered is quieter. But some people might disagree between shouted and yelled. That's okay. There doesn't have to be a definitive final answer. It's the conversation about when you use these verbs, who tends to yell or shout or mutter or whisper, like in what contexts do these verbs show up. You could have students practice saying a single line like, I like ice cream, but maybe they have to scream it, they have to shout it, they have to mutter it, they have to whisper it, so they can practice using those verbs. So there's lots of things you can do here with this, but it helps to get students away from always using said, which is an overused verb of speaking, and for more advanced students. So if you're working with translation majors or English majors, having them discuss how these words make meaning and how they compare and contrast with each other is a really beneficial activity. For lower level students, you might really have easier verbs, like, for example, or not even verbs, words. So you might have hate, dislike, love, and like, right? Just those four. Can they put them in order? You might have whisper, said, and yelled. Can they put them in order? To help them start to see those differences. And as the student's level goes up, you can get more nuanced. Okay. I do this with my English-speaking students who are going to be teachers, and we have really good conversations about the usage. Now, your students may not know all the different nuances or the different usages, which is where your expertise can come in and you can help clarify these differences. Okay, one more example. Greetings. This time it's more formal and less formal. So, hello seems maybe kind of standard. It's a pleasure to meet you feels very formal. Nice to meet you. Okay. Hi, that feels a little less. How's it going feels less. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, that feels more. What's up feels less. How are you doing? Feels kind of medium. Okay, those are my general categories, right? So you can have students do this first, like just generally less, generally more, and then we can figure out, well, let's see. Because there's how you doing, how are you doing, and how are you doing, right? There's each word individually is more formal versus like, how's it going? I feel like hi maybe is here and how's it go? What's up feels maybe the least formal of all of these choices. Good morning feels a little more formal. So I've made these into different shapes because these two are used in very specific situations, and that is the first time you meet someone. And by first time I mean ever. So if I meet Dr. Muhammad today for the very first time, I'm like, oh, it's a pleasure to meet you, Dr. Muhammad. Then tomorrow I see him, I'm not going to say it's a pleasure to meet you. I might say, good morning, Dr. Muhammad. Or I might say, how are you doing, Dr. Muhammad? Or I might say, hello. But I only use these two the very first time I meet someone. So maybe you shade it a different color after you've had students put them on the continuum, right? Maybe you want to color ones that you use with friends only, or with family, or with colleagues. You can talk about, sometimes I say hello to my friends. Usually I say hi. Actually, I usually say, how's it going? And so you can talk about that, about power structure, right? So when we meet people who have more power than us, we use the more formal ways of greeting. When we meet people who are equal in power, so colleagues, friends, that kind of thing, we often use middle to more informal because we're very comfortable with them. It also depends if we're at work we might use more formal, even with people we're friends with outside of work, but we leave work and we are here. If you have students who are going into the hospitality or tourism, often, right, they start this way working with guests, but if you're on a week-long tour with tourists showing them all around Jordan, you are going to slowly move from the more formal down to the informal. So there's lots of conversations that can be had to expand the knowledge, to think about nuances. And again, you might disagree. Maybe some students think this is the better order. I'm less concerned with being in the right order than I am with the conversation about when. Do they know when to use it? Do students understand the meaning? Do they understand the social structure in which it happens? And that kind of thing. So the conversation is the important part. Higher level students, it should all be in English. Students who are at the lower level, it might be a mix of Arabic and English in explaining their answers, but we want to push them to use more and more English. All right, so this is the Continuum exercise, and I hope you enjoy using it with your students.